Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an economic war has begun. The West has enforced unprecedented sanctions against Russian President Vladimir Putin and people in his inner circle, such as Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the whole Russian National Security Council and multiple oligarchs. Investors are dumping Russian assets as fast as they can. These sanctions can lead to a crash in the Russian ruble that will affect the country for years to come. Russia is the largest economy and the largest country globally by population, against which such strong sanctions have ever been implemented. Western leaders are aware that they will not immediately stop the war, but hope that they would perpetrate enough damage on the Russian economy to help de-escalate the conflict. Western sanctions against Russia are threatening deposit runs on Russian banks, plummeting the ruble, encouraging international investors to divest Russian assets, and opening the door to more long-term damage to the Russian economy. These measures, specifically against the central bank, make it impossible for Russia to access the foreign currency reserves it had built up over the years. It's not clear whether the measures can be expected to bring an end to Russian President Vladimir Putin's war, or they're designed to instigate regime change. But what we do know is that Vladimir Putin is confident that he can weather whatever sanctions the West imposes. Why is that? Watch this video to the end to find out. Also, if you enjoy business content, consider subscribing or liking the video. I spend a lot of time researching these stories, and only a small percentage of my viewers are subscribed. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Without any further delay, let's get to it. A wave of sanctions has already been announced as soon as Russia unleashed its huge assault on Ukraine. Economic sanctions follow punishment logic. It is believed that people feeling economic pain are expected to rise against their political leaders and demand a change in policies. These sanctions were originally designed to avoid disrupting essential energy exports, which are vital to heat homes, power factories, and full gas tanks. That helped reduce, but did not erase, a surge in energy prices caused by war and anxieties about disruptions in the flow of oil and gas. Russians have already felt the pain from the newest US and Western sanctions. The ruble plummeted in value and Russia's stock market dipped. Capital Economics, a consultancy, expects Russian inflation to hit 15% before long, with GDP falling by 5% this year. The effects of Western sanctions can also be seen in the long lines at ATMs as Russians desperately pull out their cash before it was lost. Countries have also targeted Russian oligarchs and their wealth outside, a lot of which is in posh European capitals. Russia's economy is expected to contract 35% in the second quarter and 7% in 2022, with the economy suffering an economic output decline comparable to the 1998 crisis. Russia's worries about shortages also pushed up the price of some grains and metals, which would inflict higher costs on consumers and businesses. Russia and Ukraine are also large exporters of wheat and corn, as well as essential metals like palladium, aluminium, and nickel that are used in everything from mobile phones to automobiles. But the odds of an uprising aren't great. Empirical research suggests that sanctions rarely produce the sorts of damage that compel their targets to back down. Their greatest chance of success is when they are used against democratic states, where opposition elites can mobilize the public against them. Russia has become increasingly problematic for the EU. The 2008 war against Georgia only resulted in a temporary cooling of relations, but after Moscow's March 2014 annexation of Crimea, there was no return to business as usual. The EU adopted its first sanctions against Russia in response to violations of Ukrainian sovereignty, and these have stayed in place ever since. With fears of renewed aggression against Ukraine in 2022, the EU is considering additional measures. Russia's actions in other areas also challenge international norms: illegal use of chemical weapons, cyber attacks aimed at undermining Western democracies, and human rights abuses. These too have met with the EU sanctions. Without any access to its reserves, the Russian government has resorted to desperate measures to keep its economy and financial sector afloat. The Russian central bank hiked its baseline interest rate to 20% and banned the sale of securities held by foreigners to prevent the ruble from collapsing further. But while Mr. Putin has ignored the state of international norms, he cannot ignore a modern and mammoth financial system that is largely controlled by governments and bankers outside his country. He has mobilized tens of thousands of his troops, and in response, allied governments have mobilized their vast financial power. Russia's bolstered economic defenses may help explain why Mr. Putin is willing to stage another military incursion into Ukraine, despite the lasting cost of his move in Crimea. Russian President Vladimir Putin has demonstrated that the West's primary deterrence tactic, the threat of severe economic sanctions, may not be enough to prevent the largest war in Europe in decades. Putin has signaled a willingness to absorb a crippling blow to Russia's economy to advance his security interests in Eastern Europe. In authoritarian regimes like Putin's, where average citizens are the most likely to suffer, sanctions usually hurt the opposition more than helping it. So far this year, the ruble has lost 1/3 of its value. According to a view popular among Russian elites, instead of harming Russia, Western sanctions make it stronger. Rather than being deterred by what the US describes as severe and overwhelming costs on Russia's economy, the Kremlin views sanctions on individuals, capital, and imports as a blessing in disguise. Thus, instead of fearing sanctions, Putin welcomes them. Russia, he believes, has the intellectual and industrial capacity to wean itself from dependence on Western technology. Vladimir V. Putin's posture towards the West through the recent Ukraine crisis seems unusually defiant, even for him, but there may be more behind his confidence than military power or empty bravado. It seems like he is gambling that the Russian state and financial system, which were hit with sanctions in 2014 after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, have made the necessary adjustments to withstand further isolation. Russia has been preparing to face expanded sanctions since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. The sanctions forced Russia to learn from the past and heavily invest in domestic production. Western sanctions finally gave the Kremlin the pretext to self-isolate from global markets in strategically important economic areas and nurture Russian producers. Import substitution became the regime's stated goal. The government may soon default. President Vladimir V. Putin has moved to further insulate it in recent years, building up a storehouse of foreign exchange reserves, reducing the national debt, and even banning cheese and other food imports from Europe. It has built up foreign currency reserves of $630 billion, an increase of 75% since 2015. It now has the fourth largest currency reserves in the world, despite only being the 11th largest economy. The reserves are akin to a third of the Russian economy, and don't forget that even today, the West will buy north of $700 million or 520 million pounds of Russian oil and gas. It has stockpiled enormous currency reserves and trimmed its budgets to keep its economy and government services going even under isolation. It has reoriented trade and sought to replace Western imports. Import substitution became the regime's stated goal. The policy is economically inefficient but is crucial for the survival of Putin's regime. Domestically, it allows Putin to create economic elites who owe the Kremlin their fortunes and are beholden to the regime. Not competitive internationally, their prosperity rests on Putin's decision to disengage from international trade. Internationally, sanctions eventually reduce Russia's reliance on, and thus vulnerability to, Western pressure and potential interference. Counter-sanctions and important substitution policies also increase Putin's hold on power. Sanctioned officials and oligarchs become even more loyal to and dependent on the regime. Russian counter-sanctions are genuinely popular and boost Putin's domestic legitimacy. In 2014, 83% of Russians reportedly supported the Kremlin's counter-sanctions. The levels of popular support declined over time, but a majority of Russians still approve of these measures. Consuming domestic production is also presented as a way to show one's patriotism. The item's quality is damned. Alexander Gabuev, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Moscow Center, said Russian economic officials are pretty proud and have good reasons to be for the work they have done to make the Russian economy more immune to sanctions. This transformation, among the most dramatic examples of what is known as sanctions proofing worldwide, comes less than 8 years after Western sanctions over Moscow's annexation of Crimea in 2014 mired Russia in economic and political upheaval. Putin has used a variety of tools to try to quell domestic oppression over the past 2 decades. Another source of Putin's confidence is a conviction that the West is not prepared to take serious the sustained economic pain for Ukraine. This has created confidence in Putin's circle that the sanctions will either not be that comprehensive or will not be strictly enforced for that long. Western leaders need to challenge this by telling their citizens that sanctions will worsen the cost of living crisis. It will raise energy prices and push inflation higher. Until the Russian ruling class hears democratic governments leveling with their electorates on that, they will remain confident that they can handle whatever sanctions the West imposes. If the US and its allies are serious about confronting Russia, the focus should be on limiting Russia's ability to earn money from exports first and foremost, from oil and gas. Sanctions targeting Russia's status and prestige, something Russians care deeply about, might be effective. Analysts said that the Ukraine war may have a limited impact on the global economy because trade links between Russia and the rest of the world were limited, with the country accounting for 1.5% of global GDP and 2.9% and 0.9% goods exports from the Eurozone and Britain, respectively. However, the invasion has triggered a surge in global energy prices, threatening to exacerbate the cost of living squeeze in several countries, including the UK. The war comes as the global economy is still recovering from the pandemic. On top of that, Russia closed its airspace to 36 countries, which means shipping planes will have to divert to roundabout routes, leading them to spend more on fuel and possibly encouraging them to reduce the size of their loads. But Russia still needs Europe's money. Revenue from energy exports accounts for approximately 40% of the country's federal budget. Without that money, there would be a gaping hole in the Russian government's wallet. We regard this downside scenario as a relatively high probability for how the economy could deteriorate in the event of a more protracted conflict. Do you think the Western sanctions will be able to bring Putin to the negotiating table? Let us know in the comment section below. If you've learned something new from this video, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to be the first to see our new videos. We make deep dives like this every week where we uncover the secrets of money and business.